Israelis have been gathering outside the Knesset, Israel's parliament, to protest against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's controversial judicial reforms. Delicate talks going on behind the scenes. We're waiting to hear what Benjamin Netanyahu will say today following the delicate, difficult talks going on behind the scenes. When Netanyahu eventually does speak, the wording of what he says will be crucial. People will be looking at the details of the vocabulary. Is this going to be a pause in pushing the legislation through? Or is it going to be an agreement that the legislation will be scrapped altogether? That's what the demonstrators want. But his right-wing coalition partners will be pushing hard behind the scenes to keep it alive. Israeli military caught up in rift over judicial overhaul. Israel's defense minister was sacked on Sunday after he called for a halt to the judicial overhaul, warning it was causing a social rift that was a clear, immediate and tangible danger to the security of the state. Yoav Gallant said he had never encountered such anger and disappointment among members of the Israel Defense Forces IDF, which is one of the country's most respected institutions and is seen as an apolitical unifying force in a diverse society. In recent weeks, thousands of reservists, including members of elite Air Force and military intelligence units, have said they would not report for aspects of their volunteer duty if the government pushed through its reforms. Reservists are a key component of the IDF, often carrying out frontline roles, and in the case of the Air Force, regularly involved in active combat operations. Last week, the New York Times reported that the IDF chief of staff had privately warned it was on the verge of reducing the scope of certain military operations due to the falling number of reservists. Israel's security establishment is also said to be concerned that its main adversaries, including the Palestinian militant groups Hamas and Islamic Jihad, the Lebanese militant group Hamas, and Iran and domestic extremists, are growing emboldened by the turmoil. Opposition leader addresses protesters outside the Knesset. As we've been reporting, thousands of people have gathered outside the Knesset as part of nationwide protests in Israel against the government's plans to reform the judicial system. Benny Gantz, leader of the National Unity Party, has been addressing demonstrators at a rally outside the Knesset. Gantz said that although the country is not uniform, it should be unified. "We are one people," Gantz told protesters outside Parliament. "Whoever doesn't protect his country won't have a country, and you are protecting our country," Gantz said as he thanked people for their continuous efforts. "We are one vote away from dictatorship." Israeli Labor Party. Here inside the Israeli parliament, politicians are hurrying between the chamber and their political faction meetings. The Labor Party leader Merav Michaeli just told a gathering of her MP they won't budge on their opposition until all the highly controversial legislation is scrapped completely, not just postponed. I put it to her that this didn't sound much like compromise. Doesn't her party have a duty to dial it down given the scale of chaos in the country? "There can be no compromise over democracy," she said. "We are one vote away from dictatorship." A big screen outside the chamber shows which MP are in the building. Two faces are grayed out, those of Benjamin Netanyahu and his far-right police minister Itamar Ben-gvir, who says he'll quit if the legislation is stopped. The two men have been in talks in the Prime Minister's office a few hundred yards from here. Now Netanyahu is having to grapple for his survival with the extremist forces he brought into his coalition. The stalling of Netanyahu's live TV address suggests there is still no decisive outcome. Protesters aim to paralyze Israel's services. Right now, Israelis are watching society close down around them hour by hour. When the country's biggest trade union announced a strike this morning, the first impact was felt at Ben-Gurion Airport, where departing flights were quickly halted. That was followed by shops and banks shutting their doors and universities canceling lectures. Israel's Medical Association says hospitals won't be working fully and will only provide emergency care. Even regional and local councils have been closed. As noisy demonstrations continue up and down the country, the protesters aim to paralyze the country's services and force Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu into abandoning his government's judicial reform. Opposition lawmakers express fury in Knesset. As we've been reporting, anti-government protests have swept the streets of Israel. And inside the Knesset, Israel's parliament, opposition politicians have expressed their fury towards the government's judicial reform plans. Simcha Rothman, chairman of the Israeli Parliament's Law Committee, was attacked by parliamentarians this morning, who described the reform as a radical takeover of the State of Israel. Rothman is a key architect of the Netanyahu government's controversial legal reforms aimed at overhauling the country's judicial system. "Shame! Shame!" was cried out, and accusations were made comparing it to militant Islamist groups. "This is a hostile takeover of the State of Israel. No need for Hamas, no need for Hezbollah." One lawmaker was heard saying, "The law is balanced and good for Israel," Rothman said in response. Israeli embassy staff called to join strike by the union. Israeli embassies around the world have been instructed by a workers' union to join the strikes, in a letter seen by Reuters news agency reported. A source in one Israeli embassy, who didn't want to be named, confirmed the report. They said that staff in embassies and consulates worldwide would decide whether they would join the strike or not. According to Reuters, the letter said foreign ministry activities in the country and abroad would be limited to emergency services. The web page of the Israeli embassy in Nepal has the words on strike written on it. So guys, hopefully you have liked our video, and if you like this video, subscribe our channel and don't forget to press the bell icon.